Officially, good evening and welcome. Foremost to you, Venerable Yönten, nice to see you again. Welcome to this second evening with our wonderful teacher. I was so enthusiastic after the last teachings. It just was everything and more that I was expecting and hoping for. A general introduction to the Bodhisattva vows, and I have so many pending questions and exceptions and what ifs for this topic. So I'm so happy that we could persuade such a great teacher to come and be teaching to our extended community. And welcome everybody, regulars as well as new people to Laksam. And as you have seen in the chat, I also advertised for an event with Professor Jan Willis, a direct student of Lama Yeshe, teaching on the Prajna Paramita and the way of the Bodhisattva in October, on site and online. So that's quite nice. And then I will hand over the words to you, who will teach Venerable Yönten, so you can guide us into the prayers and the topic.
Thank you, Lars. Thank you, everybody. Let's do Refuge in Bodhichitta. Sangye chudom soge chunam lai janchu badu dani kapsuchi dagi chunyan gi pe sonam gi drola benchi sangye drupa sho sangye chudom soge chunam la janchu badu dani kapsuchi dagi chunyan gi pe sonam gi Rola benjia sange drupa sho sange chudon sogi chunam la janchu padu dani kapsuchi dagi junyan gi pe sonam ki rola benjia sange drupa sho. And letting that motivation connect for you. Okay. So last time we talked about what the issue is and what the solution is, and kind of how we got into this mess and how we might get out of this mess in rough terms. But specifically, we talked about self-cherishing and self-grasping, and how bodhicitta is the direct antidote to self-cherishing. The wisdom realizing emptiness is the direct antidote to self-grasping, and that's kind of another conversation for another day. Although the Bodhisattva vows very much help us accumulate the merit that we need to achieve this realization. So there aren't tons of vows that are directly pointing to this genre of the teachings or this element of practice, but we can always practice weaving in wisdom to our method practice by just simply remembering that the reason why things are empty of inherent existence is because they dependently arise, which basically means in the beginning, in the course way, we just remember context. We just remember that everything exists in a context, that there is good, there is bad, there is what you prefer, there is what you don't prefer, but all of that exists from a context of your own life experience, your opinions. They're not self-existent from their own side. And you don't go so far down that rabbit hole that you neglect ethics, but you also don't fall into the trap of thinking just because I think something's good means it's good in and of itself, or vice versa, right? So self-grasping is a project for wisdom, and it's a project we want to be working on as best as we can. But right now we're working on our project for method, the method side of the path, bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is addressing this issue of self-cherishing, which we could probably call negative self-cherishing, just to make it clearer, because of course we need to look after ourselves. So a very healthy, robust spiritual practitioner understands that there is a good way of putting others before yourself and a bad way of putting others before yourself, right? We don't want to become martyrs. We don't want to become doormats. We don't want to lose our assertiveness or suppress our voice. And also, we need to stop putting ourselves at the center of everything in our own mind. So, self cherishing can make you feel like you're the center of the universe, even if it's a sad universe that you don't like. Or if you're not at the center of the universe, something is wrong. Or you kind of want to escape the universe and hope no one notices you in your quiet corner. Depends on the person. But there's a lot of I in your mind when self-cherishing is really up. So when we talked about it last week, I invited you to kind of think through the coming days, if you could spot times where self-cherishing was particularly dominant. So I'm just going to flash that meaning definition on the screen again, and just think about it for a second. So self-cherishing thinks of oneself as primary importance, with obliviousness to one's impact on others, while simultaneously can be hyper aware of reputation and is self conscious in a neurotic way. So just take a minute, and not quite a meditation, but kind of like just a reflection, some wisdom of contemplation, and just kind of sit for a minute and think over the last few days. When was self cherishing really up for you? And what was it like? What happened to you physically? What happened to you verbally? What happened to the quality of your thinking? And just sit for a second and really try and figure out, what is it like for me? Easiest way to find it is to think of the last time you had a bad day. What made it a bad day besides the external circumstances? How did you ruin your own day? And in the most recent difficult day that you've had, can you pinpoint the way your train of thought had the word I and me in it more often, more frequent? The mantra of self-cherishing is kind of, what about me? What about me? What about me? Or how am I going to, how am I going to, how am I going to do this or that or get this or that? So thinking of your body specifically, when self-cherishing is up, do you notice yourself getting tight and tense? Maybe even some tension headaches or some lower back pain, maybe digestive issues or more. Or do you go the other way and go into collapse mode and flop and feel very heavy and sluggish and not able to get any momentum? Just kind of exploring physically, which camp do you fall into when self-cherishing is really activated? And it might depend on the day. It might be that at work, self-cherishing looks like a tense body, and at home, self-cherishing looks like a heavy body. And it doesn't really matter what you find. The important thing is to find, what am I like? And then your speech. Is there anything that changes in your speech when you've really gotten that narrow focus, short-sightedness of negative self-cherishing. Some people's voices get higher, more tight and constricted. Some people's voices get lower, maybe even more authoritarian. Sometimes there's a change in the speed. Maybe you become more blunt. Maybe you become more needy and ingratiating and do too much validating, too much complimenting. You can feel the whispers of other afflictions riding the wave of your self-cherishing. How it starts to, in a way, crystallize into anger or into attachment, pride, jealousy, etc. And so then checking your mind. When self-cherishing is really driving, do you feel more distracted, more vague, or maybe you get hyper-focused, tunnel vision? Are there a lot of excuses and permissiveness, or is there a sharpness to your discipline that is actually a little bit making yourself the enemy? Tones of self-loathing, somewhat punishing. Sometimes there's the war of, I feel this way, I shouldn't feel this way. I feel this way, I shouldn't feel this way. Stop feeling this way. It's only right that I feel this way. But somehow feeling becomes more emphasized. Okay. So letting yourself kind of come back to the more classroom mind. Do you feel comfortable sharing any of those experiences, physically, verbally, mentally, kind of ways you can catch when self-cherishing is really activated? Were you able to find some, or did it just feel like a blur? Yeah, yeah, Brenda, please go ahead. Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
I almost want to say all of the above. Um, but what I've identified over the course of the week is whenever my mind doesn't feel stable and quiet and firm, and sometimes I can be very agitated, but sort of excited in some way. Grasping at certain, not grasping, that's the wrong word, but wanting something, wanting attention, wanting to do something, whatever.
Yeah.
And there are other times when I felt a kind of withdrawal within my mind, of resistance, or I don't want that. I don't want to go there. I don't want.
Yeah.
But so those two extremes are what I feel most often when things are going wrong.
Yeah.
So that if my mind is not somewhere in that peaceful center, then this is likely self-cherishing.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are really clear. Those are really clear and I think quite relatable. I mean, sometimes it helps to picture yourself in a break and say, what if I were to go sit in a comfortable chair with a cup of tea right now and someone were to interrupt me in my break? If you're really having self-cherishing up, an interruption can enrage you, especially if you're interrupted during a break, whatever a break means to you. If self-cherishing isn't up and you're sitting down having a break, someone interrupts you, you're like, oh, hey, and it's like, sure. And you like almost welcome them into your break time. And like, would you like a cup of tea? I will also make one for you. When self-cherishing's not up, you're much more expansive. And sometimes you don't even notice how tunnel vision you've gotten until you get interrupted. And that interruption triggers some sort of rage or some sort of neediness and grasping of a person, come here, give me what I need in terms of attention or whatever. So what happens is that self-cherishing opens the door to all the other afflictions just kind of getting right in there. And if you can catch it when it's just kind of bubbling up into kind of, as Brenda was describing, like losing your peace, having that agitation, then sometimes just noticing it dispels it. As soon as you kind of get angry or you get attachment in there, sometimes you just have to ride the wave and let it die a natural death. But if you can catch it when it's small, sometimes that is enough for it to dispel. Other things people had experience with trying to understand their own self-cherishing
There's
red
two
flag?
examples.
Yeah, go ahead.
Two examples in the chat box.
Sure.
Maybe they want to type if I could read it.
Sure.
John wrote, I got angry over emails and I sent more emails trying to fix the first email. I, quote, felt like I wasn't being heard. I just needed to let go. Hyper-focus, exaggerated, authoritarian, very blunt tunnel vision sharpness. Example.
Yep. Yeah, that's a classic one, isn't it? When you write something unskillful and then you write another thing to fix it and then another and another and another. And if self-cherishing is up, then the button save to draft is your best friend, right? Save to draft, save to draft. Come back to it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I see. There's one from Mikhail as well.
I can probably voice that.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
So
Yeah.
I was actually having a German class, and German language is not easy. And there was this topic that I'm really struggling with, and apparently I was not alone there. There were other people who had a better understanding of that, and I was sort of trying to defend myself there as if somebody did not really properly educate me or did not give me the right explanations. And I was like talking like that for some minutes, and then I suddenly understood that actually, it's totally wrong. So, okay, so I actually remembered our last discussion with you, and it was actually quite surprising. Normally I would finish accusing everybody around, and then I would understand maybe a day later or a week later. But now it was happening actually quite in the middle, and then I stopped. So
Yeah, it's a good
thank you for that.
sign. Yeah, it kicks in quickly and really just repetition. The time between it arising and you catching it gets shorter and shorter. And it's like really satisfying actually to see your mind get stronger and to see your mind get more grounded and kind. It's really quite inspiring and empowering when that happens. And yeah, proceed. But you have to bring it up into awareness. What happens is that we will get it and we will get it deeply and then we'll forget. Right? And so how to remember on purpose, on purpose, on purpose. And part of what the Bodhisattva vows do is they create like a container or like a subtle form of some kind that keeps you oriented in this way. And it's such a powerful thing because when you read the Bodhisattva vows, a lot of them you keep already, even if you haven't taken them. But when you take them, you're saying, I am intentionally holding this ever after, which means even when you're not consciously aware of them, they're kind of ticking in the background, accumulating merit, mental momentum. And so it's much more powerful to do something intentionally than for it to be a passive thing that you kind of agree with, but you've not like committed to. I think we all feel it, that there is power in promises. There's power in promises. And what is a vow if not a promise? From a Buddhist perspective, vows are a promise, but they are different to maybe the way normally we talk about vows and promises, because there is an assumption that you will not be perfect, built right into them. I think I mentioned this before. They're described as being like a beautiful golden vase, very, very precious, very easy to dent, because gold is soft metal, and very easy to repair. So you think of the Bodhisattva vows as they can dent quite easily, but you can also repair them quite easily. So to keep a vow purely means that as soon as you have a wobble, as soon as you transgress it, you repair it. And it actually takes quite a lot to lose the vow, to break the promise from the root. You have to really mean it, except for a couple of them, which I'll get to. So the Bodhisattva vows, really, you see them as trainings, like training wheels on a bicycle from when you were a little child. And eventually you won't need them when you're a Buddha. But the point is that if you could keep them absolutely perfectly, there would be no need to have them. Right? There would be no need to have them if you could keep them perfectly. So you're making a promise, but you're not making a promise for perfection. You're making a commitment to training. Do you feel the nuance? Like it's a difference, and it is different to how we think of vows, maybe in the West or in modern life, right? So the idea is that you hold them, you keep them, they live with you, and when you transgress them, you restore them through a very basic practice, which is like one verse saying, I want to restore them, right? So once you've taken them initially, you can renew them all by yourself. Yeah, it's really beautiful to know. So with the whole self-cherishing thing, we have to again and again be convinced of its disadvantages. So again and again, we break this idea that self-cherishing is what protects us. That's the problem, is there is part of us that feels like it is our hero. It is the thing that gives us strength. And that is an illusion. That's a lie that we tell ourselves. So we have to again and again remember, what is it like? What does it feel like? What does it do? And why is that problematic and not how I want to live? So His Holiness describes it really beautifully. He says, from beginningless time until now, our sworn enemy, the self-centered attitude or self-cherishing thought that is responsible for all our problems, has been residing comfortably inside us, as if it were our best friend. It keeps whispering in our ear, if I don't take care of you, no one will. And in our confusion, we believe it. On the other hand, our true friend, the mind cherishing others, which is the source of all happiness, has been kept at a distance with suspicion. Now that we clearly see the disadvantages of self-preoccupation and the benefits of caring for others, let's rectify this injustice and cherish others as much as possible in our daily life. So there's a really good process for this, equalizing self and others. And this is basically a logic that looks at proportions. So if we think of only ourselves and we forget about other people, then our minds occupy a very small area. And inside that small area, tiny problems appear very big, right? That's the crux of the issue. When our minds get small, tiny things get to us, right? But the moment you develop a sense of concern for others, you realize that just like ourselves, they also want happiness. They also want satisfaction. When you have this sense of concern, your mind automatically widens. At this point, your own problems, even big problems, will not be so significant. The result? Big increase in peace of mind. So if you think only of yourself, only your own happiness, the result is actually less happiness. You get more anxiety, more fear. Right? So the only way to really convince yourself of this is to use your memories and to see, oh yeah, that's quite true. Yeah, you prove it through experience, you prove it through logic. And when you think about when you've been caring for others in an open-ended way, the way that that fuels you and brings you such deep contentment and satisfaction. Of course, when you're caring for others with expectations, you ruin it for yourself. And some of those expectations are on yourself, right? You want to perform generosity, right? Or you want to perform good host or hostess or good friend or insightful caregiver or something. And that kind of expectation on yourself creates a pressure. And that kind of expectation is coming from self-cherishing, wanting to see yourself as the savior, right? But if you've, think of times that you've helped people in a really open-ended way with no expectations and just the deep satisfaction you feel at the end of the day and how well you sleep. It could be something as simple as helping someone move house, right? And you're just hauling boxes to the truck, sitting in the truck and eating pizza, chatting, listening to the radio, teasing each other. Okay, back to it. Hauling boxes. Everyone's dirty and dusty and sweaty. It's hard labor, but you're quite happy because you're together and you're doing something that has meaning. It's important. They need to move their boxes from point A to point B, right? It's tangible. And, offering someone a meal, you can feel this way. Or going on a hike together with someone and they've not been to the beautiful place and you're showing them the beautiful place. So you're going on a hike together to show them your beautiful place. These sort of things just bring so much deep joy. But those very same things can collapse joy as soon as we think, do they appreciate it? Right? As soon as you go in with expecting applause, right? Expecting validation, you ruin it for yourself. And that's why it's so difficult, because it's not like you don't deserve validation or you don't deserve appreciation and support and respect. Of course you deserve it. All of us deserve it, but we should never expect it, right? And that's the line. And so it's not like we suddenly stop validating other people. We might validate people even more and say how wonderful it is that you do this or you do that. I really appreciate this and that. We know it helps people feel fueled and feel seen and get momentum. But for our own personal practice, to try and get out of the habit of needing someone to say, you did a good job, right? Like somehow get out of the child mind. Because self-cherishing is a very immature mind, and it really wants a pat on the head. Yeah, aren't you a good girl? Aren't you a good boy? And it's so human, but it is the thing that kills these beautiful moments. So if you can keep coming back to, I'm doing good, kind things for others for their own sake, because it's a good thing to do. I'm not doing it for gratification. You might wind up getting a lot of support and a lot of affection, but if you go seeking that affection, it's going to ruin it. So this is life, right? These are things we already know, I think probably intuitively or experientially, or we've named in different ways, but it's important to underline that the reason why we do these mistakes is because of self-cherishing. So it is normal. There's not something specifically wrong with us that's not also wrong with everyone else. And also it's removable. We can train ourselves out of it. So then it helps with like shame and embarrassment of like, oh, I'm so embarrassing that I'm so immature. I'm so embarrassing that I'm so self-centered. Don't go into that trap either. Everyone's like that. Looks different, but everyone's like that. So any questions about self-cherishing before we shift back to the vows? Clear? Unfortunately, yes, no, fortunately clear. Okay. All right, so we talked a little bit about how there's relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. Here we're talking about relative or conventional bodhicitta, remembering that bodhicitta is the main Mahayana motivation with two aspirations. to become enlightened, right? To become a complete Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. These aspirations become a main mind or primary consciousness through merit, study, deep conviction, repetition, and meditations. So to actually have bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, you need a lot of momentum, a lot of merit, a lot of good karma. And the Bodhisattva vows are one of the quickest ways to accumulate that merit. So there's conventional bodhicitta is of two types: aspiring and engaging. And last time we were talking a little bit about aspiring and the things that support that. But just to clarify those terms, aspiring and engaging, Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life by Shantideva puts it very clearly. So Master Shantideva says, in brief, you should understand the mind of enlightenment to be of two types: the mind that wishes enlightenment and the mind that engages enlightenment, as is understood by the instances of desiring to go and going. So the wise should understand respectively the distinction between these two, right? Okay. So this verse 18, this is like the directive to take the Bodhisattva vows. So for one who has perfectly adopted this mind, with the thought never to turn away for the sake of totally liberating the infinite realms of sentient beings, for those ones, from that time onward, even while asleep or lacking conscientiousness, the force of merit equal to the sky will continuously ensue. So that's true of all vows, and that why they're so important and powerful for practice, that once you've actually taken them, you're accumulating merit, even when you're asleep, even when you're unconscious, or, you know, sort of it's in the subconscious or you're oblivious. It has this momentum. And so that's to kind of get us excited about the fact that we either already have them or want to take them. But the mind of an engaged bodhisattva vow is to never turn away for the sake of totally liberating the infinite realms of sentient beings. That's a big ask, right? To never turn away for the sake of totally liberating the infinite realms of sentient beings, right? Like, we might have thought bodhisattva vows were just about like being a nice person. Yeah. But actually it's really taking responsibility for all sentient beings joyfully, with no kind of time pressure, but like it's like no man left behind, you know? So it's interesting to kind of think, do I actually have that kind of wish present, right? Brenz is asking, is it lacking conscientiousness or lacking consciousness? Lacking conscientiousness, like not being aware of, that's true, but also lacking consciousness, like when you're asleep. So both senses. Yep. Even so, in both senses, you're accumulating merit when you have the Bodhisattva vows. It's really amazing that way. So you'll notice if they've really taken hold, if while you're sleeping, there's a chance to break a Bodhisattva vow and you decide not to, even when you're sleeping. Yeah. So that's always a really good sign, is if you self-correct in moments like that. It's quite amazing. And if you don't in your dreams, and your dreams are full of nonsense, that's normal and whatever. Give it time. But it's nice. It's a good sign when you practice while sleeping. So this is a big ask, and we don't want it to feel too abstract or too much pressure that I'm going to liberate the infinite sentient beings. What you want to think is, how does my mood today and my speech today affect the people in my immediate life? And start by making it really real and direct. Who are you going to see today? Your friends, your family, your spouse, your pets. They will be directly impacted if you are in a dark mood, right? Your neighbors will be directly impacted if you're in a dark mood. And they might not even see you, right? They might just be like walking their dog and like, ooh, bad vibes, right? We're very sensitive to each other, right? It's not about necessarily speech. There's these energetic things that we're all picking up on and tuning into, and our intuition and our empathy are actually pretty well developed. And the more we lean into it and the more we practice, the more obvious that becomes. But we sometimes don't realize how much of an effect we have on each other. So if you're thinking, if I am in a really good mood, that also benefits the people around me. It's easy to see when you're in a dark mood how it makes the house heavy and how it's hard on everyone else. And then when you finally kind of get out of it, you feel kind of guilty that you made it hard for everyone. But when it's good, you have that impact also, right? It uplifts people. You are a powerful condition for them to be in a good space, right? You're not the direct cause, but you're a powerful condition for that. And so you think my project of becoming a Buddha, in a way, is that same idea magnified beyond comprehension. That if I was in a completely awakened state, where my heart was completely open at all times, where I had no suffering, no ignorance, no ill will towards anyone, plus this wisdom, this omniscience that could understand what everyone needs and what they're able to receive, how powerful that would be, the impact on others. You know, you can think about times when you've been very moved by someone you haven't met directly. Maybe you've seen His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, in a big public talk. But it could have even been like someone you look up to that's secular. It could be something like a rock concert, right? And the band comes on stage and everyone's like, yeah, and they're also happy, right? So, I mean, of course, when we're a Buddha, it's going to be super powerful. But I mean, even just, I don't know, whoever's famous now comes on stage, everyone's like, yay, you know, just that one person and the work they've done to think, how can I entertain these people and how can I share my art with them? And of course, that's all like egocentric and all messy, right? Like the people in the band are like, look at me with a giant me, right? And yet there is some part of them that wants to share with others to varying degrees depending on the band. So that even that amount of I want to share and offer conditions for happiness has that infectious ability. We have to remember that that is us too, and not minimize our own impact. So, you know, think I'm doing my spiritual path for the people in my immediate life and the ripple effect of that. And the more I develop, kind of the more beings are in my radius. So engaging Bodhisattva vows are when you're actually taking the vows. And as Shantideva said, it's the difference between wishing to go and actually going. Yeah, so actually going, actually setting out on the path, you really need the mentality of whether I like this person, whether I don't like this person, whether I'm neutral about this person, all of these people, I'm working for their welfare. Whether I like this animal, whether I like this species, whether I like this bug, whether I like this realm, you know, I'm working for all of them. So you don't have to suddenly decide to like everyone. You're deciding not to let your surface preferences mandate your goodwill. Does that make sense? So you're not pretending not to have opinions. You're not pretending not to have more rapport or less rapport with certain people. You're just deciding that those are not the reasons for goodwill anymore. Yeah. It's not like some people are worthy of my care and some people aren't. I've decided that everyone is. Questions on that before we move on? Those two?
Looks like Eleanor.
Yeah, Eleanor, go
you
ahead.
had-
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. I was just thinking as you were talking, do you have to be conscious of your bodhisattva vows all the time, you know, like in your daily practice, or make the commitment at the beginning of the day?
You don't need to be too specific about them, you know, in a tight way. And they still have power, even if you're not thinking of them, even if you're distracted, they still have power, but they will have more power the more you bring them to the forefront of your mind. So when you, in the beginning of the day, when you set your motivation of bodhicitta, if you also are remembering that you have bodhisattva vows, Even if you don't go through all the vows, it adds more power and weight. But it's kind of like in between meditation sessions, when you're walking around in your daily life, if you are familiar with your vows well, they kick in. Like, think of the very first Bodhisattva vow, to refrain from praising oneself and criticizing others. If we just did that one, just that one, how different life would be. So sometimes it's worthwhile even just kind of picking one vow as your project for walking around daily life practice, because otherwise you can get overwhelmed with like all 18 of them and all the secondary offenses and all this and all that. If you're just aware that your whole path is about bodhicitta, and right now you're deepening this one, that can be a good strategy. But no, you don't have to be aware of them all the time, all day, every day. They have power even when you forget. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, other questions? Okay. So last time we were talking about the wishing bodhisattva vows, how before you even take the engaging vows, you need some awareness of abandoning the 4 black negative dharmas and adopting the 4 white positive dharmas. And we did the black ones, and so now we'll do the white ones. So these are the things to take upon yourself, to decide to do while you're really generating this wish to have bodhicitta. So the first one is to abandon deliberately lying to any sentient being, whether for the sake of humor or even at the cost of your life. So it doesn't mean that you can't have humor or that you can't protect your life. It's that deliberately lying is really counter to the spiritual path. Now, this one is tricky because it says even at the cost of your life, and most commentaries say terms and conditions apply. Okay, so generally speaking, you're never going to lie, not even as a joke. It's contrary to the spiritual path. And if, you're in a war zone and I don't know, say you're protecting others, right? And there's someone hiding in a bunker and the bad guys come and say, "Where are the people that are hiding in the bunker?" You should lie. You should say, "They're over there," if they're over there, right? You should lie. And there's even stories from the time of the Buddha, right? There was a monk meditating under a tree and a deer runs by, and then the hunter comes and says, "Which way did the deer go?" And the monk says, "Oh, that way." Big lie, right? For the benefit of the deer, for the benefit of the hunter, not accumulating killing karma. Okay, so this is one where we have to remember nuance always exists and commentaries are so important, because otherwise you read that and you either think that's impossible or stupid, or you take it so literally that you do it even at the wrong time. So what you're trying to adopt the attitude is, my working premise in life is honesty. And there's a million little fibs and exaggerations and embellishments that we do in our life that are not that big a deal, but because we do them so often, our speech loses power. And our power to affect change through our speech loses power. And trust in relationships might be dented also. And why do we exaggerate? Why we lie, big fat lies, those are usually more obvious why we lied. But little ones, why do we do the little ones? Usually some preservation of reputation, to seem a certain way. We say these little lies to seem a certain way, to seem more funny, more grand, more well-traveled, more clever. Something usually is why we exaggerate, or to avoid criticism. We kind of like fudge the truth a little bit, right? And all of that is reinforcing the false sense of I. So when you're trying to achieve this bodhicitta mentality, you have to really examine, why am I deceptive? When am I deceptive? What is that about? Yeah. And to really make that a priority, to really have honesty in all areas. So when it says even at the cost of your life, that's the attitude to adopt. But of course, there are conditions in which you would on purpose lie. to save someone else. But those actually do not come up very often, right? It's usually a life-saving reason. Are there other reasons where you justify lying? You know, to save someone's feelings, are you really saving their feelings, or are you just saving an uncomfortable conversation for you? But they're going to find out anyway, and it's going to hurt them anyway, and you've just avoided being the one that has to deal with it. You know, these are the sort of things to ask ourselves. Yeah. What comes up with you for you guys when you see that one? Number one.
Yeah, I have the kind of different problem because I'm brutally frank every time, and some people say, "Oh, thank you for being frank," but yeah, you would rather not say that. And I'm trying to learn to keep silence sometimes
Yes.
because, yeah, you know, I was unable to cheat at school, for instance, because everybody saw that, including the main teacher. And yeah, and sometimes it's like, okay, you're saying somebody right in the face, including the president of the United States, and yeah, it can be a bit of trouble sometimes too.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between honesty and candor, right? Honesty and candor, or honesty and frankness. It's sort of like, if it's going to wound them, you don't need to like go around, you know, shouting truths. I think it sounds like you're learning that all too well, right? You know, but yeah, there's a time and a place for brutal honesty, but every day just transparency, openness, you know, unguardedness, but still being very skillful of, you know, is what I'm saying going to hurt them? Maybe I need to wait for another time. Maybe it doesn't need to be said, these kind of things. Really, the vow is about refraining from active deception. Yeah, active
Yeah,
deception.
so I think sometimes it's safer to not say anything, because
Yeah.
then you start to produce white lies, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can produce a situation when you get into even more trouble. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I understand the dilemma. And daily life is not so tidy as just writing, you know, reading the words on the screen. It's not so simple. Yeah, Lars, please go ahead.
I was picturing a kid suffering seriously from anxiety, asking, "Are we all gonna die? Is there gonna be a big war? Is there a
Mm.
hells?" And sort of twisting it a little around, making it more feasible, so to speak. So it's not just, yeah, of course we all are gonna die. You wouldn't say something like that to a kid. That would be horrific. I mean,
Well, this is the question, isn't it? Like, what does it look like in daily life to speak skillfully the truth? You know, think about the first time you became aware of death as a child. Maybe a pet died, maybe a relative died, and it was a big deal. It was a confronting moment. And yet, you know, if your parents held you well through that truth, it became a very vital part of growing up. And if they avoided the conversation or they made it too sweet, that actually made growing up more difficult. So, of course, as you said, you wouldn't just say, "Yes, it's true, everyone's going to die. Sorry, kid." You know, you wouldn't do it that way, right? But, you know, you might say, well, no one really knows what happens when the body stops working, but some people think that the mind continues and goes on to another rebirth, and some people think the mind goes on to heaven, and some people think this, and you can kind of start opening up conversations around spirituality and you know, opening up things like, and even if nothing happens after the body stops working, your impact is still there forever and the people who love you. And like there's ways of still saying the truth, but it's age appropriate, and it opens up another realm of discussion. So, you know, you don't just kind of leave them hanging with a truth without contextualization or ways of processing the truth, I guess. Yeah, it's like tell them the truth, but also tell them ways to process the truth. You know? Yeah, and age appropriate and all of that. It's not simple. You know, it's not simple, but yeah. Yeah, John says something. Let's see. Is it helpful to self-reflect on vows at the end of the day? Should we use the vows as a tool for self-analysis? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Whenever it's relevant. Like as Eleanor was saying at the beginning of the day, it's good to start with bodhicitta, and that would be a good opportunity to remember the vows exist in your continuum if you've taken them. And at the end of the day, you're purifying mistakes. Usually that's what the end of the day practice is about. So you might just read through them and being like, oops, that one, oh, that one got a little dented. All right, purifying that, restoring that. So that is a good exercise. The trick is to not get overwhelmed by the magnitude of them, but to take them piece by piece. Yeah, just gently. Keep remembering their trainings. So the number 2, I think, is pretty straightforward. Do not discriminate amongst sentient beings. This opposes the 4th negative dharma. The 4th negative dharma is this one, putting on an air of having selfless thought, but having an ulterior motive other than the pure wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, such as pretending to be a scholar or concealing your shortcomings. So you're not helping people with an ulterior motive to be seen well, but you're also not discriminating amongst sentient beings. You're deciding that all of them are worth your time, all of them are worth your care, but what that looks like is still specific to each relationship, and it's not like you need to speak to everyone with the same kind of vocabulary or the same amount. You're still recognizing there is individual karma there. So not discriminating means what you would assume not discriminating means. Yeah. To abandon criticizing bodhisattvas, since you do not know who is a bodhisattva and who is not, it's best to treat all sentient beings as Buddhas and bodhisattvas. This one, like the lying, is remembering that to criticize is not the same thing as to criticize a behavior. So the training here is, can I stop criticizing people and start isolating behaviors that I find problematic and speaking to those? So say you have a very difficult boss who works you overtime and doesn't pay you overtime. Maybe that only happens in America. Yeah, you guys have better laws. But so imagine you have a bad boss doing bad things and they're very, very bad. And the story in your head is that they're bad. If you can try to separate, okay, no, this set of behaviors are problematic or ineffective or harmful, and I need to speak about them and address them, completely valid. But to say those bad behaviors mean they are bad and a bad person is a very limited way of understanding a human being. Yeah. No one is one thing. No one is their worst behavior. Sometimes their behavior that is bad is the very most prominent and the most regular and the most easy to see, but that is not a helpful thing to spotlight in terms of thinking of them as a human. But it might be a helpful thing to spotlight in terms of trying to adjust behaviors or protect others from that behavior. So, and it's a way what you maybe would learn in psychology, right? That people are not their behaviors. They have responsibility for their behaviors and should be accountable to them, but we need to separate. Yeah. So don't criticize people, criticize behaviors. Does that make sense?
Oh, I've got at work. I have a person who definitely, if something goes wrong, does not look at the problem, but looks at the person and says loudly that this person is very silly or everything's. How could you do this? And yeah, and it's like 15 minutes, and I have got like thunderbolts reaction, like. And it's why when I start to I write silly things on the chat and everything, and I really feel silly because the whole thing was about something technical that could be fixed in 5 minutes, but this person made the situation like, oh, you are totally catastrophe as a person, and it's very unpleasant sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. When other people are not behaving well and not sort of supporting the behaviors that you're trying to do, just again and again, patience, but humor, humor really helps you not get tight. And the more you can see what people do as a reflection of their wish to achieve happiness or to avoid suffering, the more you feel related to them. The more you're like, okay, I might not ever do that specifically, but I have versions of that coming from very similar drives. And aren't we all absurd? Aren't we all ridiculous? Somehow having that shared humanity feeling becomes very important for the Bodhisattva work, right? To not feel people as other. So whatever you can do to be like, okay, that is annoying. I'm not pretending it's not annoying. How can I bring it into my heart and see myself in that? Yeah. And then the fourth one is to take upon yourself the responsibility to establish all sentient beings in the Mahayana path by encouraging their enthusiasm for the Mahayana path. So even if you're not successful, you try. Rejoicing in the virtues of others instead of being jealous, and cultivating love and compassion in all your actions. So encouraging their enthusiasm for the Mahayana path means they already have enthusiasm, right? So you're not proselytizing, you're not being a missionary. It's that if someone is really into this, help them, support them. And if you think, oh, they are an uneducated person or not a smart person or very new to the spiritual path person, this is too much for them. Don't be condescending, right? You never know what people's imprints are, and everyone has Buddha nature. So just encourage them, and if they seem to be going too fast and are going to burn themselves out, of course you can speak about that, but we don't want to ruin someone's momentum. It's so hard to get the conditions together to do a good thing, isn't it? It's so hard to get conditions together to like deepen your spiritual path and to not just have this autopilot life that is never examined. So if anyone has a little flicker of light happening, we want to help grow it. It's so important because it really takes so many conditions for people to start to wake up. So not ruining the momentum is the main one there. So those are for the wishing bodhicitta. And then the engaging bodhicitta are the actual vows. So are you ready? Yes? Okay. So when you take the Bodhisattva vows, it takes a lot to break them, as I mentioned. So to lose the Bodhisattva vows, you have to not see breaking it as a fault and not give up the wish and doing them with delight and having no shame or consideration. So these are the 4 binding factors that must all be present to commit 16 of the root downfalls, but there are 18, right? So the other 2, holding wrong views and giving up bodhicitta, don't need these branches. I will guard myself from these 18 root downfalls. So of the 18 root vows, 16 of them need a lot to break at the root. You have to basically go, it's not important, I don't care, I'm doing it anyway, I'm happy that I did it, and really have this willfulness. Yeah. But for giving up bodhicitta, that's the whole point of having the vows, right? Is to develop your bodhicitta. So if you're giving up bodhicitta, you've missed the point and you've broken it at the root and need to take them freshly from a lama. And having wrong views. So wrong views in this context meaning active disbelief in cause and effect. So it's not about doubt. You're allowed to have doubt. You should have doubt. Doubt is very useful. You're allowed to question anything, debate anything. We love debate in Buddhism. It's not about doubt. It's about holding that cause and effect are not true, meaning that positive actions lead to happiness. You don't believe that. And that negative actions lead to suffering. You don't believe that. That you think it's completely fine to be unethical as your method for getting happiness, right? That you can embezzle money and you can cheat people and you can lie all the time. And if that gets you what you want, that is completely fair and valid, and you believe that to be an essential core value truth. that is a wrong view. So if you're holding that, you have lost your Bodhisattva vows. Now, if you have habits of that because of, I don't know, your family of origin or how you grew up, but you're working on it, that's fine. But if you're really holding to that, that's a wrong view. Or like thinking an animal sacrifice is a good offering to the Buddha. Don't do that. Right? Or I don't know. There's all sorts of wrong views, but it's holding to them. And usually it's the type of thing that goes directly against the ethics of non-harmfulness. So before we go into the other 16, do those two make sense why they're the most important? Yeah, to not give up bodhicitta and to not hold wrong views. Do you have any thoughts there? Good. Good. Okay. Well, we'll have, let's see, 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Great.
Welcome
I
back.
had to, thank you so much. I had to switch to my iPad because I left my power cord at work. So anyway, my computer died, and here we are on my iPad. So that means we cannot use any more PowerPoints, which maybe is a good thing, you know, maybe that's just the thing. So I can't actually see everyone in gallery view as before, because of the, oh, I take it all back. There you are. I found it. Sorry, I'm just not used to using my iPad for Zoom. All right, so the engaging Bodhisattva vows are what we're up to now, and it takes a lot to break them. Those two we talked about, giving up bodhicitta and holding wrong views, are the ones that don't need the branches. Okay, so when you take the Bodhisattva vows, it's important to realize that who you take them from matters. So who you take them from, you are developing a guru-disciple relationship with on a sutra level. I'm just curious, what does that mean to you guys? A guru-disciple relationship on a sutra level. What does that mean? How do you see that person?
Yeah, I can start out. I
Yeah,
took them
please.
from Geshe Namdak, who is also my teacher at the basic program. And that means I regularly meet with Geshe-la, receive other teachings from Geshe-la, and obviously use the sort of doubt where the two-pointed doubt going, seeing if I can proceed in the correct direction, but also seeing Geshe-la as somebody who conveys the Buddha's teachings from a valid source, a direct lineage to the Buddha, and somebody who actually, in a more lay term, would say, having walked the talk, so to speak, somebody who has embodied the teachings, but still also did the hard task, because, you know, Geshe-la did the Geshe study program, obviously, then I mean, that's quite a task. So for me, it's just about the perseverance, and this is what I try to apply for myself as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, that's definitely the sort of thing that you're looking for when you're looking for a teacher that you feel you want to take vows from. You know, the benefit of taking vows from a Lama is that you're connecting to the unbroken oral tradition from the very time of the Buddha up until now. And that carries a lot of blessings, a lot of weight, a lot of care, a lot of support, and then responsibility in terms of relationship. And so Tantra guru-disciple relationship is a lot more complex and a little heavier in some ways. Sutra level guru-disciple relationship is a little like a mentor, but it's more than a mentor, because you're deciding that in at least the teaching context and at least the Dharma talk context, that you're choosing to hear what they say as personal advice for you. So it becomes much less passive learning. It's not just hearing content, learning new things, which is good, but you're not hearing it with the take it or leave it. You're hearing it as, I've chosen this person to be the representative of the Buddha for me in this context. what would the Buddha be trying to tell me through the words of these teachings specifically? And it doesn't matter if the teacher is a Buddha or not. If you've chosen them to be your sutra level teacher, if you're listening for personal advice, you will get personal advice. And it's very magical and cool to experiment with that happening. And also it's just some basic psychology also, that you make it more relatable and immediate if you're listening in that way. So whether you're going secular or whether you're going mystical, this type of listening carries a lot more power. So if you've chosen someone as your teacher and you've taken vows from them particularly, you need to hear what they say, at least in a teaching context, as personal advice. You're allowed to say no to personal advice, of course, especially if it's unethical, definitely say no. But hearing it in that way, if you're thinking, what is the Buddha trying to tell me at this time? Don't you feel like it changes the quality of your listening?
Mm.
Yeah. So that's part of the responsibility, and they become a much more powerful field of accumulation for you in terms of merit and also in terms of negative karma. So if you're criticizing a person who is a Dharma teacher, it has whatever weight. But if you're criticizing a person who is your Dharma teacher, it's very heavy, right? So you're the one that decided to make this commitment. They were offering the vows, you took them on, you know, if no one dragged you into it, it was voluntary. But having decided, then there's some responsibility there. So we want to make sure that we're not taking these lightly, because a lot of people want the vows and aren't thinking about the teacher, right? And who you get it from matters. Do you have questions about that? Different levels of guru, different levels of responsibility. Bodhisattva vows are sutra level. Yeah, Lars, go ahead. Or
There's something in the chat. Can we take Bodhisattva vows from multiple teachers?
Yep, you can. Each one you're developing that relationship with, though. So know that. Know that. Yeah, Kristen?
Yeah, hi. So I wondered if, like, do you have to be a certain level of Lama to, like, offer the Bodhisattva vows?
Yeah, it's usually something that your own teachers have given you permission to do. So there's various criteria, you know, theoretically, in a perfect world, someone giving Bodhisattva vows has Bodhichitta, uncontrived Bodhichitta. How can you check that? Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but their own teachers have said, you are stable enough. You are stable enough, you're reliable enough, you're allowed to start giving these vows now. So their own teacher will have given them permission.
Okay, I just wondered.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. And there's actually quite a few teachers who have permission to give Bodhisattva vows, but don't, because of the heaviness of the karmic responsibility with the students. So they might give refuge lay vows, the pradamoksha vows of, you know, not to kill, not to steal, those ones, they might give refuge, but not give Bodhisattva vows, because it's just a little bit more involved karmically. So interesting. Yes, interesting. Yeah, Nadia, go ahead.
Thanks, Venerable. Just a quick question. How do you see when you take the vows online with a person in a meeting? The relationship sometimes seems a bit sort of impersonal, like especially if you're in a group, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered about that for some time now.
Yeah, there can be that feeling of distance, especially if it's online or especially if it's in a big group. And one thing to do is to just keep showing up to things that they're offering and kind of feel your way into that relationship. You know, it could be that it stays a little bit distant and other teachers become closer for you, and that's not actually a problem necessarily. You just think of them with gratitude of, thank goodness I have these vows. They're so precious to have in my continuum. I hope I can be closer to you later in life or in the next life. But right now, that is our relationship, that we have these vows. So some people even have that with their ordination vows, where someone will give them the vows of a monk or a nun because they're very, very senior and their own teachers are like, we want to give you the best of the best. And then they don't see them again. And it's kind of like, oh, goodbye. Right. So it's not necessarily a problem. It's just if you're feeling a little bereft of personal guidance, seek out more ways to connect. And even if that stays online, think of different ways of listening more deeply, that this is personal advice for me. How does that change the quality of my learning? You know, that this is for me specifically, my life today. You know, it really does change something, and it can build that closeness. So whether you build that closeness with that teacher or you seek out more teachers who are easier to get close to, either is okay.
I've got the same problem because I've taken the Bodhisattva Vows online, and I'm working with totally different person on daily basis. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, you try. I'm visiting the teacher that gave me the Bodhisattva Vows, but it's not my regular teacher. So it's like kind of being in two places, and yeah, you need to think sometimes how to make it together.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And also don't underestimate what your mind is capable of. If you're thinking of someone regularly in your practice, like for example, I loved His Holiness the Dalai Lama years and years and years before I ever met him, and really just valued his teachings, valued his way of life, valued so many things about his stance on so many things politically. You know, I really respected him on so many levels. And then the more I got into Dharma centers, the more we're doing long life prayers for him all the time and talking about him all the time, that by the time I finally met him in person, it just felt so familiar. So I think that don't underestimate the closeness that is built just through the power of thought and repetition. Yeah. It helps us to personify the path, to have someone to look up to. That's just true, but also there's something more than that person involved when you make that commitment to each other. So who that person is important, but you've now made a gateway to connecting to the divine in a deeper way than you had before. And that's something very, very precious. And, you know, the person that doesn't have to be around for that to be felt necessarily, just needs more repetition, more thought. Yeah. Other questions about sutra level gurus particularly, or Bodhisattva vow taking?
There was one more question in the chat asking if you could give Bodhisattva vows.
I can, but I won't.
Brenda, yeah, Brenda
But I
asked.
won't. Yeah, thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. I do give refuge occasionally, but I'm in the boat of people really need to know me a long time. All of my quirks, all of my weirdness, all of my idiosyncrasies, and I need to know them quite a long time before I feel like it's time to make those kind of karmic connections. But there are other teachers who feel more confident with, sure, yeah, let's do it. And they have good reasons for that as well. So each teacher has their own kind of discretion about these things. So yeah, maybe someday. Maybe someday. Yeah. So when you're taking Bodhisattva vows, the first time you might be a little bit distracted, a little bit oblivious, a little bit overwhelmed with the whole situation. So it actually is good to take them more than once, even with the same teacher, because every time you take it, you're more familiar with the procedure. It can go more deeply. The same is true of tantric empowerments. Just because you've had green Tara once, do it again and again, because each time it builds strength and familiarity. Now, once you actually have Bodhisattva vows, you know, even if it's not every day, say it's like twice a month on the new moon and the full moon, for example, when things are a little bit more powerful feeling and they're kind of natural transition phases, do make sure you sit with, I need to restore my Bodhisattva vows. Yeah, there are ones that got dented. There's ones that are getting a little bit dusty, right? For lack of a better metaphor. I need to restore them because they are so precious, and we want to make, I guess, the most merit that we can so that we can develop realizations quickly, so that we can benefit people more deeply. So it's important to kind of not take it for granted that just once you've taken them, there they are, now I'm done, my job is done, I don't have to think about them ever again. when you take tantric vows, part of the tantric vows includes reciting the Bodhisattva vows at least twice a day. So that's quite nice. It's built right into people that have tantric vows. But if you don't, it's still a nice practice to just read through them. Even if you're not reading that slowly, even if you're not thinking that deeply, just reading through them somewhat regularly keeps them up in awareness. Yeah. Them up in awareness. I see some questions in the chat. Let me see if my iPad can cope. Let's see. What are the karmic implications? The karmic implications, that's kind of a long story. It's just the more vows you take with a teacher, the stronger the karma between you is, and certainly you are more likely to encounter them in the future, absolutely, and to feel familiarity with that. And then Kristen's asking, do you recommend any online teachers who offer these vows? Certainly His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I recommend very much. And also Garchen Rinpoche offers them online. He's also very beautiful. He's not of our tradition. He's Nyingma, but is he Nyingma or is he Kagyu? Anyway, he's lovely. So he offers them online, live as well. I'm not sure if Venerable Rabina does. Do you guys know, does Rabina offer Bodhisattva vows or just refuge?
I've
Not
seen
sure.
her doing it once, but it's a quite different take than the one I took. More informal, her style.
Yeah.
But it's only one video I found. I never did it with Venerable Vina, who's actually my root guru. So, so I'm not quite sure that she likes to do that one.
Yeah, there's a lot on the side of the teacher that we have to consider. So some of us are quite hesitant. So, but there's also something to be said for making a request because it creates the cause, right? So any teaching that you want, any subject, any topic that you want that doesn't seem to be offered, request it. Any vows that you want, whether that teacher is going to give them or not, ask for them. It helps to create the cause to meet them. So it's still worthwhile asking. And if it's someone like Venerable Rabina, she might offer them, but like in a private setting or in a more personal one-on-one setting and not online. Another teacher that's traveling who might not do it online, but probably would at your Dharma center, if he came through, would be Jado Rinpoche, who is the abbot of Namgyal Monastery, and that's His Holiness's monastery. So Jado Rinpoche, probably if we bugged Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo and really, really asked, she probably would. So, you know, just keep asking and see how it goes. Okay, so we're almost done. I wanted to talk about the first vow, the first one, praising oneself and belittling others. If you were to just read, refrain from praising oneself and belittling others, does it already make sense? Do you need it explained? Right. What does it mean to praise oneself? It's tricky because some of it's culturally specific. For example, in Australia or in New Zealand, you would never talk about your qualifications or like the cool things that you've done for very long because people would think that you were really arrogant, right? They would think, oh God, this guy, right? On and on about themselves, yuck. But then in Israel, if you don't do that, they think that you're so humble that you probably don't know anything and can't say anything or do anything. So you kind of have to say, I've done this and I've done that and I've done this and I've done that, almost to like give a resume or a CV of some of your qualifications before they listen to you. So some of it is culturally relevant what it actually looks like. Right? In some cultures, talking about your achievements is good, in some it's bad, in some it's mixed. So we're not talking about the literal what you say. We're talking about, in many of these vows, a mentality. So what is the mentality of praising oneself? It's reputation focused. Right? It's reputation focused, it's pride generated, it's arrogant. That's what we're trying to avoid. So if there's a situation where you need to say, I've done this and this, because then people will let you help them, then do that, right? So it's not about the words, it's about the mentality. Does that feel clear? Yeah. Yeah, and criticizing others is as before, right? So you can criticize behavior, but try not to criticize the person. Yeah, Lars, go ahead.
So I work with people who suffer from mental illnesses and other stuff, trying to get them back at work. So I tell them, obviously, you shouldn't talk about all your problems at job interview. You should talk about what can you benefit and do for this company, so to speak. So that wouldn't be sort of, I mean, why talk about your schizophrenia or whatever? That would be simply just not wise for anybody.
Can you ask again? Yeah, I'm missing your question. I'm sorry. Is it?
I'm
Yeah,
not
please.
I'm not sure it's actually a question. But I mean, should I also tell them to sort of don't talk too much about your qualifications. You should also talk about how problematic you are. I mean, they're not talking other people's down. They're just sort of finding their own qualities.
I think that is something important to think about, but is not about the vow. The vow is always about, what are you doing? You individual. Are you praising yourself? Are you belittling others? So it's the most natural human thing on earth that as soon as you come into resonance with a good idea, you immediately apply it to others and think they should do the same. Is so human and natural, right? Like someone's on a health kick and they're doing a new diet and they want to tell everyone about their new diet. You should try it and, do paleo or whatever the hell, right? But what we're trying to do is to say, I need to work on myself first. I need to work on myself first. And then what I say and do in real time with people and what I suggest for other people, I have to be really very clear. What is my motivation? Is it to bring out the best in them? Is it to support them developing into a Buddha? Or are they just annoying me and I want them to shut up? Right? And only you know, right? Only you know why you're correcting people. It might be to bring out the best in them. It might be because they're annoying you and you want them to shut up. Only you know, and the Buddhas. But so that's part of it. And in terms of like correcting other people's speech patterns, I mean, you need a solid friendship for that to go in. Because think about you, like when can you be corrected? Who can correct you? Who can you hear advice from? It's got to be a good friend or someone that you consider a teacher or a mentor. Otherwise, you're just like, mind your own business. What do you know? Right? Okay, or whatever your response is. I'm revealing too much. But you know what I mean? Right? So just because you're right doesn't mean it won't go in, or doesn't mean it will go in, right? Just because you're correct in your observation doesn't mean there's any opening for them to receive it. So with the Bodhisattva vows, you really start with yourself, start with your own motivation. Yeah. Yeah, I thought I saw a hand. Was there Tara?
Brenda?
Oh, yeah. Brenda,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I did put my hand up, but I've just noticed the time, so it's not that important.
No worries. No worries. We'll do it next time. All right, let's dedicate. Thank you so much, everyone. Janchu semcho rinpoche ma ke panam ke gyuchi ke pan yampa me pa yang gone kondu pelwa sho. Tony dawa rinpoche ma ke panam ke gyuchi ke pan yampa me pa yang gone kondu pelwa sho. Okay. So for the coming week, just really sit with that first vow. What is it to refrain from praising oneself and belittling others? And just kind of make that your thought project for the week if you feel like it. And I'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
everybody
Venerable.
for joining
Thank
in.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Bye-bye.
And
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
see you next
Thank you,
Thursday,
Venerable.
everybody.
Thank you.
And please check the chat about the upcoming events with Jan Willis, Professor Jan Willis at Lozang as well. It's going to be really fascinating.
Yeah, Jan Willis is amazing. I really recommend her.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Yay, bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye. How are you, Tara?
Oh. She left. Nice to see you smiling. Hey, bye. Bye, bye. Hey, Monica.